please help me to reach 7,000 subscribers. The morning sun in Willow Creek had a way of softening even the hardest kinds of pain. But not today. Today, the sky felt heavier, like it knew something was coming. And somewhere between the quiet rustle of trees and the distant hum of traffic, Elena Brooks stood in her tiny kitchen, staring at a coffee mug she wasn't even drinking from. She had always been the kind of woman who carried strength without announcing it. Steady hands, calm decisions, and a heart that never let her quit, even when the world pushed her into corners most people never made it out of. But this morning, something inside her felt different. Fragile, a little cracked. The kind of feeling that tells you your life is about to be divided into before and after. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Another message, another reminder, another threat she didn't deserve. Elena swallowed hard, forcing down the wave of anxiety rising in her chest. She used to think that if she kept her head down and worked harder than everyone else, things would eventually get better. That's what her father always told her. Keep your heart clean and life will return the favor. But life wasn't honoring that promise. Not anymore. She slipped on her jacket, tucked her hair behind her ear, and walked out the door toward her old gray Honda, the car that had survived everything with her. On the passenger seat sat the envelope she received last night. No sender, no return address, just her name. And inside, the picture that changed everything. A picture taken without her knowing. A picture meant to threaten her. A picture that meant someone was watching. Elena exhaled shakily, started the engine, and drove toward downtown Willow Creek. The kind of American small town where everyone knows everyone's business but pretends they don't. Today, Elena wished she could disappear into that silence, but her fate had already shifted. By the time she pulled into the parking lot of her workplace, the bright, glass-walled corporate building of Riverside Tech Solutions, her pulse still wouldn't slow. She sat there for a moment, her fingers gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady her breath. Inside those walls waited the one man who had the power to destroy everything she had rebuilt. Marcus Hale, her boss, her nightmare dressed in a perfect suit. The day she exposed his unethical practices was the day her life took a sharp turn. He was the reason she had been receiving anonymous messages. He was the reason someone was following her. He was the reason she had to sleep with her phone under her pillow. But the picture in her glove compartment, that was something else. That was a warning. And Elena knew warnings eventually turn into explosions. She pushed open the car door and stepped out, the autumn wind whipping across her face. People around her hurried into the building, laughing, carrying coffee, talking about weekend plans, while she walked in with a storm only she could feel. As she entered the lobby, her eyes met the security officer, Logan Carter, a man with a quiet, observant nature. He nodded at her like he always did, but today he paused. "You okay?" he asked gently. Elena forced a smile. Just a long morning. He didn't believe her. She could tell. But he let it go. Logan always let things go too easily, except the things that mattered. Elena didn't know yet, but Logan was about to play a far bigger role in her life than either of them imagined. The elevator doors closed behind her and she stared at her reflection in the polished silver. She didn't look scared. She didn't look broken. She looked like a woman holding on with the last thread of strength she had left. And then the doors opened to the 5th floor. Her co-workers moved around quickly, focused, busy, unaware, or maybe pretending not to be aware of the tension that always followed Elena these days. She walked to her desk, set her bag down, and tried to slip into her usual routine. But the dread inside her kept circling like a cold shadow. At 9:17 a.m., her computer pinged. A new email. Subject line: "You should have kept quiet." She froze. Her throat tightened. Her fingertips turned cold. She clicked it open slowly, and there it was. The same picture from the envelope, the same picture taken through her kitchen window. But this time, it came with a message typed beneath it. Next time, you won't see it coming. Elena pushed back from her desk, her pulse pounding loudly. She could hear it in her ears. She didn't deserve this. She didn't ask for this. All she did was tell the truth, because truth was supposed to matter. Truth was supposed to protect the innocent. But here in this building, truth had become a dangerous currency. She grabbed her phone and stepped away from her desk, her eyes stinging. She didn't cry, not yet, but she was close, too close. She walked into the hallway, leaned against the wall, and tried to breathe through the rising panic. She didn't know someone was watching from the far end of the corridor. Marcus Hale stood there, arm folded, expression cold, eyes locked on her like she was prey. "Rough morning, Elena?" he asked, his voice calm, too calm. She looked at him, every part of her trembling in ways she couldn't hide. "Leave me alone, Marcus." His smile was thin, sharp, poisonous. "You should have signed the agreement like everyone else. But you wanted to play hero." Her jaw clenched. "I wanted the truth." "Well," he murmured, stepping closer, "truth has consequences." That was the moment Elena realized something frightening. Not just that Marcus was behind this, but that he was willing to go much further than she ever imagined. Much, much further. She didn't know yet, but today would be the last day she ever took him lightly. Because, before the sun set on Willow Creek, Elena Brooks would uncover the first piece of the secret that would turn her entire world upside down. And this story, her story, was only just beginning. If you're watching this right now, stay close, because what happens next will shake you. And before we go further, comment below, "I am ready for the truth." Let's see how many of you are brave enough to follow this journey to the end.
Avery Collins and Ethan Hale had settled into a rhythm that felt almost too perfect. From the very beginning, their connection had been effortless, the kind that made strangers stop and think, are they in love or is this a movie? Their weekends were a montage of laughter, quiet whispers, and stolen glances that said more than words ever could. They discovered the city together, each street in New York a backdrop for their growing story. Rooftop dinners with twinkling city lights, spontaneous road trips to the Hamptons, and cozy winter walks along the Chicago River became their shared ritual. Avery, who had always believed that love couldn't be bought, found herself swept away by Ethan's charm, his intelligence, and the way he seemed genuinely fascinated by her world. For the first time, she let herself feel unguarded, even with the secret weight of her inheritance resting silently behind her. The turning point came during a snowy escape to Colorado. They had rented a cabin, its wooden beams and stone fireplace a perfect cocoon against the winter chill. Ethan had been acting unusually nervous that morning, his hands fidgeting with the folded napkin on the breakfast table. Avery had teased him, brushing her hand over his, trying to coax him out of whatever mood had overtaken him. Then, in a moment that felt like a scene from a film, Ethan dropped to one knee. The snowflakes around them melted into sparkling confetti, and for a heartbeat, time seemed suspended. "Avery Collins," he said, his voice trembling with sincerity, "I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Avery's heart soared, a rush of warmth flooding her chest. Every careful rule she had set for herself about love, every lesson her grandfather had imparted on trust and vulnerability, seemed irrelevant at that moment. She said yes, laughing through tears, and embraced a future that on the surface felt perfect. But life rarely lets perfection exist untested. 3 weeks later, they sat in Ethan's sleek Chicago apartment, the skyline glowing orange with sunset. They were sharing wine, discussing wedding plans, when Ethan casually mentioned a prenup. "It's just standard," he said, his tone light, almost dismissive. "We should protect ourselves, you know. It's nothing personal." Avery froze, the glass of Merlot hovering midair. Her mind flashed back to her grandfather's words. Money changes people. Protect your heart first. Your wealth is not the measure of love. She felt a pang of unease, a tiny fissure in the idealized world she had allowed herself to build. Ethan's suggestion should have been a simple conversation, but to Avery it was loaded. She studied him carefully, noting the ease with which he smiled, the confidence in his posture, and the way he seemed genuinely fascinated by her world. She could see the potential for greed, but also knew that discussing her inheritance would complicate things she wasn't ready to expose. She made a quiet decision, signing the prenup later that week, silently agreeing to keep the truth about her $120 million inheritance to herself. Even as she signed, a subtle tension wound itself around her chest. Love and caution, trust and secrecy, they were all now tangled in a fragile knot. She tried to shake it off, reminding herself that this was a precaution, not an indictment of Ethan's character. But deep down, she felt the first inkling of a fracture in the seamless story of their romance. Despite this, their days continued in a blissful whirlwind. Road trips through fall-colored New England, rooftop dates with sparkling fairy lights, and late-night conversations about dreams, fears, and everything in between. Avery threw herself into these moments fully. She laughed like she hadn't in years, holding on to the version of Ethan she had fallen for. And yet, under the surface, a quiet voice whispered caution. Every gesture of love from Ethan now carried a subtle weight, a question Avery didn't yet dare to ask. She stayed vigilant, careful not to reveal her hidden fortune, observing with the soft, intuitive patience her grandfather had always praised. In her quiet moments alone, she would look at the prenup, feel the edges of its paper against her fingertips, and wonder if love could survive secrecy. She reminded herself of her grandfather's advice, of the wisdom that wealth could be both shield and burden. Avery's heart wanted to trust, to surrender fully, but her mind insisted on prudence. By the time the winter snow had melted into the first blooms of spring, Avery understood that the prenup was more than a legal document. It was a silent test, a reflection of the delicate balance between love and self-preservation. She had chosen to protect herself, to live by the code her grandfather had given her. And though Ethan remained unaware of the full extent of her inheritance, Avery knew that the road ahead would require a careful blend of openness and discretion. As she looked at Ethan that evening, sharing a quiet smile over dinner plans for the coming week, she felt both love and resolve intertwining. There was magic in their romance, yes, but Avery had learned that even magic needed boundaries, and that trust once given must sometimes coexist with a shield. And so their story continued, a dance of hearts and hidden truths, a romance that shimmered with promise but hinted at the subtle, inevitable trials to come. Avery's internal promise remained. She would never let wealth dictate her love, but she would never let anyone take advantage of it. If you've ever been torn between love and caution, or had to hide a part of yourself to protect your heart, drop a comment below. Have you ever signed a prenup, or faced a moment where trust and money collided? Share your thoughts. I want to hear your story.
The first year of Avery and Ethan's marriage felt like a dream, carefully crafted by fate. Their Brooklyn Heights apartment smelled of fresh flowers every morning, and sunlight spilled through the wide windows, highlighting their weekend brunches and the soft laughter that echoed through the rooms. Their social media was a cascade of couple photos, matching jackets on park benches, cozy dinner snapshots, and stolen kisses under city lights. Avery's heart was full. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that perfection could exist. Ethan seemed devoted, attentive, and utterly charming. Business trips were merely interludes, and when he returned, he was all smiles and stories. Avery, who had learned to guard her heart fiercely, had never felt so seen, so understood. The city felt smaller when they were together, every corner a shared memory waiting to happen. But life, as Avery's grandfather had warned, rarely stays still. The subtle shifts began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Ethan's late nights at the office became more frequent, and he returned home with a faint, unfamiliar scent lingering on his clothes. Phone calls that once ended in cheerful chatter now ended abruptly, with a tightness in his jaw that he refused to explain. Avery noticed him guarding his phone, a casual glance that carried an edge of secrecy. The cracks were small at first. A comment about her outfit that felt sharper than intended, a playful tease about her work that cut deeper than she expected. Friends' names were mentioned with unnecessary scrutiny, and casual outings began to feel like tests rather than shared enjoyment. Avery, always careful, remained calm, never revealing the hidden depths of her inheritance. She lived modestly, even for her own comfort, intentionally blending her world with Ethan's reality. Her best friend, Jenna Brooks, observed with quiet concern. "Avery," she said one evening, voice soft but firm, "I don't want to worry you, but have you noticed Ethan changing? The way he looks at you sometimes? It's not the same." Avery smiled, dismissing it as stress from work, but Jenna's eyes lingered on hers, searching, as if hoping Avery would see the truth she was too proud to admit. Avery began noticing patterns that made her stomach twist with unease. A receipt for a hotel stay she hadn't known about, a last-minute business meeting that smelled more like an excuse than work, an absence of warmth in moments that used to feel electric. And yet she stayed calm. The wealth she had inherited silently became her shield, a quiet assurance that no matter what, she had the power to protect herself. Evenings once filled with laughter now carried a subtle tension. Avery found herself replaying conversations, reading between the lines, trying to decipher the invisible shift in Ethan's behavior. Each smile he offered seemed calculated, each compliment slightly hollow. It was as if their marriage was slowly being rewritten, a story she no longer recognized, but one she was determined to navigate with grace. She questioned herself. Was it her imagination, or was the love she thought was untouchable quietly eroding? Memories of their snowy Colorado proposal resurfaced, the moment feeling both distant and fragile. She realized that marriage, no matter how enchanted, demanded vigilance, especially when one had something worth protecting. She reminded herself of her grandfather's words, echoing like a mantra. "Trust is precious, Avery, but never naive. Protect your heart and your legacy, even if no one else sees the value." And so she did. She continued to nurture the marriage outwardly, attending dinners, hosting friends, and maintaining the image of happiness, while inwardly she observed, calculated, and prepared. The slow cooling of their relationship was a quiet, almost cinematic shift. It wasn't dramatic arguments or overt betrayals yet. It was the subtle erosion of warmth, the distance growing in shared spaces, the unspoken tension that hung heavier with each passing week. Avery's love remained intact, but now it was coupled with cautious awareness. She reflected on the irony of it all. The prenup she had signed, the inheritance she kept secret, and the life they were building together. Everything was perfect on the surface, yet beneath the smiles and shared memories, Avery sensed the slow creep of reality testing their bond. It was a lesson she hadn't anticipated when she said yes in the snow. A reminder that love alone couldn't shield her from the complexities of human desire and ambition. Despite the growing chill, Avery clung to the moments of genuine connection. A surprise bouquet, a soft brush of hands in the kitchen, laughter over burnt toast on a Sunday morning. These fragments kept her tethered to hope. But the awareness of what might come, the silent preparation for the eventual fracture, lingered like a shadow she couldn't ignore. She confided in herself, in the quiet of her apartment, that love wasn't naive, it was intentional. And while she hoped Ethan's heart remained true, she refused to allow the growing distance to erode her autonomy, her joy, or the power she held quietly within her. Avery understood now that marriage wasn't just about passion, it was about vigilance, boundaries, and the delicate dance between trust and self-preservation. By the end of the year, Avery's intuition had sharpened into quiet certainty. The man she loved might be shifting, the relationship might be bending under unseen pressures, but she had not bent. Her wealth, her foresight, her restraint, all remained intact, hidden, a secret safeguard that no betrayal could diminish.
Avery Collins had grown accustomed to the subtle tensions in her marriage, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment that changed everything. It was a quiet Thursday evening in Brooklyn Heights. Ethan was on a business call in the living room, the low hum of the city filtering through the windows. Avery, pouring herself a cup of chamomile tea, happened to overhear a single line, a line that cut through her carefully maintained calm like a blade. "He won't get a penny," Ethan said, his voice sharp and precise, laced with a cold certainty that made Avery's chest tighten. Time seemed to stop. The words echoed in her mind, reverberating against the walls of the life she had painstakingly built with love and trust. Avery felt a swirl of emotions, shock, disbelief, and a bitter, creeping anger, but above all, she felt the clarity of truth. Ethan had never intended to share her life. He had only ever seen her as a means to an end. She retreated to the kitchen, heart hammering, forcing herself to breathe. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the sting, to acknowledge the betrayal, but she did not panic. Avery had learned from her grandfather that power often came quietly, from patience and strategy, not from immediate reaction. Her wealth, her secret inheritance, was her shield. And now, more than ever, she needed to wield it wisely. In the days that followed, the signs became impossible to ignore. Travel receipts she hadn't authorized, unexplained late nights, and the subtle disappearance of affection all painted the same picture. Ethan's behavior was no longer the small, manageable shifts of the previous year. It had escalated into a pattern of deliberate deception. Avery observed him with quiet calculation. Every word he spoke, every casual touch, was filtered through the lens of her newfound clarity. She could feel the cold detachment in him, a stark contrast to the man who had proposed in a snow-laden Colorado cabin months ago. It was a transformation that was almost cinematic in its cruelty, subtle, precise, and entirely unnoticed by anyone but her. Then came the day he asked for a divorce. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, nor was it fueled by anger or argument. Ethan was calm, uncannily composed, as if he were simply executing a well-rehearsed plan. "I think it's best we end this amicably," he said, voice even, eyes steady. "I want to make this as smooth as possible for both of us." Avery listened, letting the words settle over her. There was no shouting, no pleading, just the quiet, deliberate severing of a bond she had nurtured so carefully. The prenup she had signed loomed over her like a cold shadow. Legally, she would walk away with nothing. But for the first time, she realized that while money could be taken from her, her composure, her dignity, and her mind remained untouched. The finalization of the divorce was clinical. They sat across from each other at the sleek, neutral-toned lawyer's office. Papers shuffled, signatures were placed, and in a single moment, years of shared moments, rooftop dates, laughter-filled mornings, whispered promises, were reduced to ink and legal terms. The handshake was cold, businesslike, devoid of the warmth they had once shared. Avery felt a fleeting pang, a whisper of grief for what could have been, but it was immediately replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. She rose from her seat, collected her belongings, and left the room without looking back. There was no drama, no confrontation, only the steady heartbeat of someone who had endured betrayal and emerged unbroken. Walking through the streets of Brooklyn, Avery allowed herself a moment of introspection. The city lights glimmered against the river, reflecting her own inner strength. She thought of her grandfather, of the lessons he had imparted about resilience, about the silent power of wealth when wielded with discretion. Protect yourself first, Avery. Money can't buy love, but it can buy freedom. Avery realized that this was precisely the freedom he could not take from her. Ethan's attempt to claim what was not rightfully his had failed in the most essential way. He could not touch her autonomy, her future, or the life she was determined to build. In a strange, ironic sense, the divorce had given her a gift: clarity. She began to see the situation for what it truly was, not a loss, but an opportunity. A chance to reclaim her life, to rebuild her world on her own terms, and to finally let go of the illusions that had once blinded her. The betrayal, while painful, became a catalyst for transformation. As she returned to her apartment, Avery allowed herself a private moment of release. She sat by the window, city lights sparkling below, and breathed deeply. The hurt lingered, yes, but it was tempered by a growing sense of empowerment. She was no longer a woman hiding behind wealth for security alone. She was a woman ready to harness that wealth, her mind, and her courage to shape a future unbound by deceit or compromise. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that Ethan would soon realize the magnitude of his miscalculation. But that revelation, Avery understood, would belong to her alone. She would not chase it, not retaliate, not lower herself to the level of resentment. Instead, she would move forward, elegantly, deliberately, and entirely in control of her story.
Collins had never felt more alive. The divorce had stripped away illusions, leaving her with clarity, freedom, and a determination to build a life entirely on her own terms. Her inherited fortune, long kept as a silent shield, was no longer a secret to herself alone. It was the key to the life she had always deserved. She began by channeling her energy into purpose. Launching a Women in Tech Scholarship Foundation became her mission, a way to honor her grandfather's legacy and give back to the community that had shaped her career. Avery immersed herself in planning, mentoring, and fundraising, all while moving into a Manhattan penthouse that overlooked the city skyline, a space that mirrored the life she was finally creating for herself. The city lights danced across the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting her triumphs, her independence, and the power she had quietly accumulated. Yet life has a way of testing timing. One crisp autumn afternoon, while Avery sat in a luxury cafe reviewing scholarship applications, she saw him. Ethan. He entered with his usual confident stride, laughing at something his assistant had whispered. His eyes scanned the room casually, but when they landed on her, something changed. The smile faded. A flicker of disbelief crossed his face, quickly masked by a thin veneer of composure. Avery felt a quiet thrill of anticipation. She had no intention of engaging, no desire to recreate the past, but there was power in presence. With calm precision, she rose and approached the counter, casually ordering her coffee, each step deliberate. Ethan, now seated near the corner, could not hide the tension that began to ripple across his features. "Ethan," she said lightly, almost teasing as she passed by his table. He looked up, startled, his eyes widening slightly. "Avery." His voice carried a mixture of recognition and a subtle undercurrent of panic, though he tried to mask it with politeness. She smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of her lips. "It's been a while," she said, her tone almost conversational. But then, as casually as one might comment on the weather, she added, "By the way, I've been living off my inheritance all this time, about $120 million. The words landed like a thunderclap. Ethan's jaw went slack, and for a brief moment, the room seemed to shrink around him. Coffee cups, laptops, the hum of the cafe, all faded into the background as he stared, uncomprehending. Avery didn't wait for a reaction. She knew there wouldn't be one worth acknowledging. Her revelation was not a plea, not an invitation. It was a statement, a boundary, and a reminder of the power he never respected. Ethan tried to respond, fumbling over words that failed to form coherently. I didn't, you, how?" His voice cracked, a mixture of disbelief, shame, and humiliation. Avery only shook her head slightly,
almost pityingly, before turning and walking away. Each step was deliberate, a rhythm of liberation, leaving Ethan to process the weight of his own misjudgment. Over the following days, Ethan's attempts to contact her escalated. Text messages, missed calls, and increasingly desperate emails poured in, all begging for explanation, all tinged with regret. But Avery ignored them. She did not reply. She did not engage. Her power was not in retaliation. It was in her detachment, her refusal to allow him to rewrite her narrative. The control she wielded quietly but undeniably was complete. Meanwhile, her foundation flourished. Scholarships were awarded, mentorship programs launched, and women in tech began to see a new role model emerge. Not someone flaunting wealth, but someone using it to create opportunity, impact, and change. Avery's social circles shifted from the performative to the purposeful. She celebrated achievements not for recognition, but for the fulfillment they brought. And yet, somewhere in the echoes of New York's bustling streets, the memory of Ethan lingered, not as a shadow, but as a lesson. Avery understood now that love could coexist with caution, that kindness did not require vulnerability to exploitation, and that true freedom was built not on the absence of pain, but on the mastery of one's own life. In one quiet moment, standing on her penthouse balcony as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Avery reflected on the journey. From her grandfather's guidance to the romance, the betrayal, and the ultimate liberation. Every step had led her here. She felt no bitterness, only an unwavering sense of self. She had not only survived, but she had thrived, turning every trial into fuel for growth. The big reveal to Ethan was not about vengeance. It was about reclaiming her narrative. She had proven, silently and powerfully, that no one could take from her what she valued most: autonomy, dignity, and vision. And the realization of this truth rippled outward, subtly, into every decision she made, every new opportunity she embraced. Have you ever faced someone who underestimated you? How did you reclaim your power and rebuild your life? Drop a comment below and share your story. Let's celebrate those moments of quiet triumph together.
Ethan thought he had it all figured out. He believed his charm, his cunning, and his carefully constructed lies would shield him from consequences. But karma, Olivia knew, had a way of arriving silently, unpredictably, and this time it had a face he would recognize. It began with small signs, barely noticeable at first: a misdirected email, a client walking away at the last minute, a deal slipping through his fingers for no logical reason. Ethan shrugged it off, convinced it was coincidence, but Olivia watched from the sidelines, every detail confirming that the pieces were falling exactly where they were meant to. The universe had begun its work, and she had a hand guiding it. Her own life had transformed in ways Ethan couldn't even imagine. The foundation she had started was thriving. Her projects were flourishing, partnerships solidifying, and her social presence radiated confidence and power. Every day, she moved with the ease of someone who had outsmarted the chaos around her. Ethan, meanwhile, was unraveling, one missed step, one overlooked detail at a time. The first real confrontation came unexpectedly. Olivia received a tip from a mutual acquaintance, someone who had once worked closely with Ethan. "He's trying to recover what he lost, but it's slipping," the voice said. Olivia didn't smile outwardly, but inside bubbled satisfaction. It wasn't cruel, it was natural justice. She had always believed that actions have consequences, and Ethan was now seeing the reflection of his own choices. Ethan's world began to collapse in slow motion. The investments he'd relied on were vanishing, his influence fading, and colleagues began questioning his judgment. For the first time, he felt doubt gnawing at him. Every confident facade he had built was cracking, exposing vulnerability he wasn't accustomed to. Meanwhile, Olivia's power grew. She had positioned herself in ways Ethan could never anticipate, behind-the-scenes moves that solidified her authority and independence. Every public success, every private triumph reinforced the contrast between them. He had assumed she would be powerless without him, but now it was clear she was unstoppable, thriving, and fully in control. The turning point came during a high-profile gala. Olivia's foundation had raised record-breaking funds, attracting attention from top investors and media outlets. Ethan attended, expecting to assert dominance, perhaps regain some semblance of control. But as he looked across the room, he saw Olivia, not frazzled, not defensive, but radiant, commanding, and untouchable. She was the story, the power, the center of every conversation. And Ethan, who once believed he could manipulate her world, realized he was merely an observer to her success. A whispered tip reached Olivia that Ethan had been forced to liquidate assets he had flaunted, a public and undeniable fall from the carefully curated image he had maintained. Olivia allowed herself a quiet smile. Karma was unfolding, not with her interference alone, but with every choice Ethan had made finally catching up to him. She didn't need to gloat. The truth was enough. The universe had a way of balancing itself, and she had been patient enough to witness it. That night, she reflected on everything. The prenup, the secrets, the quiet power she had maintained throughout the chaos. Each decision, each moment of restraint and strategy had culminated in this undeniable victory. Ethan had been reckless, arrogant, and blinded by self-interest. Olivia had been wise, patient, and guided by integrity. The scales had tipped, and the balance was now visible to all who cared to look. As the city lights shimmered outside her window, she whispered to herself, "Power is silent, patience is deadly, and karma never misses." She raised her glass of wine to the skyline, a private toast to justice, strategy, and the future she was now free to shape on her own terms. The final message was clear not only to Ethan, but to anyone who had doubted her. Underestimate Olivia, and you will see the full weight of her power. And the audience is left with a question that resonates emotionally. If someone betrayed you, would you wait for karma or take control yourself? Comment below. I'm reading every single one.
Avery Collins had emerged from the storm of her past stronger than ever. The divorce, once a source of pain and uncertainty, had become the catalyst for a life reimagined. She moved through each day with quiet confidence, no longer tethered by fear or the expectations of others. Her inherited wealth, once a secret she had guarded closely, now fueled a vision far greater than herself, a vision that intertwined purpose, passion, and freedom. Her Women in Tech Scholarship Foundation had grown beyond anything she had imagined. Avery poured her energy into designing programs that not only provided financial support, but also mentorship and professional guidance. Young women from across the country began reaching out, their messages full of hope, excitement, and gratitude. Each success story was a reminder that the power she held was not merely personal, it was transformative. She traveled often, attending conferences, speaking on panels, and visiting universities. With every journey, Avery discovered new perspectives, meeting individuals who inspired her, and learning lessons that deepened her understanding of leadership, trust, and resilience. The world felt vast, vibrant, and full of possibility. She reveled in the sense of liberation that came from knowing she was living entirely on her own terms. In quieter moments, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here,
The love she had once believed in, the betrayal that had nearly unseated her, and the careful silence that had protected her. All now formed the mosaic of her life. Avery understood that wealth alone had never defined her happiness. It had been her wisdom, patience, and integrity that had allowed her to survive and flourish. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind, a guiding light that had never dimmed. Avery, independence is your greatest treasure. Trust wisely, love carefully, and never forget that freedom cannot be taken if you guard it with your heart and mind. She often found herself smiling at these memories, appreciating the foresight and care he had instilled in her. Avery's personal growth mirrored her professional success. She embraced relationships that were meaningful, surrounding herself with friends and colleagues who shared her values and inspired her growth. She nurtured connections built on trust, authenticity, and mutual respect. Romantic love was no longer the axis of her life. It was a chapter she had learned from, not the definition of her existence. In her Manhattan penthouse, overlooking the glowing skyline, Avery often paused to savor the quiet victories, the subtle joys of autonomy, the thrill of creative success, and the peace of emotional resilience. Each reflection reminded her of how far she had come, how carefully she had navigated a path from deception to empowerment. Travel brought her perspective as well. From the serene beaches of California to the historic streets of Europe, Avery allowed herself to experience life fully. She documented these journeys not for attention, but for the personal lessons they offered, insights into human nature, culture, and the unspoken power of observation. Every city became a classroom, every encounter a chance to grow stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. As Avery reflected, she realized that her journey had reshaped her understanding of love, trust, and wealth. Love, she now knew, must be measured not by grand gestures or outward appearances, but by authenticity and respect. Trust must be earned and observed, never assumed. And wealth, while powerful, was truly meaningful only when it could create positive impact, both for oneself and for others. She had also learned the quiet strength of boundaries. The experience with Ethan, though painful, had taught her that protecting oneself is not selfish, it is essential. Avery had walked away from betrayal with her dignity intact, her future unbroken, and her vision undiminished. The foundation she built, the life she cultivated, and the lessons she carried forward were testaments to that inner strength. Avery's new chapter was not defined by the mistakes of the past, but by the mastery of the present. Each day was an opportunity to grow, to inspire, and to leave a lasting legacy. Her life was no longer a story of vulnerability masked by wealth. It was a narrative of empowerment, self-awareness, and fearless independence. How have you reclaimed your power after a life-changing experience? Share your story in the comments below. What lessons about trust, independence, or self-worth have shaped your path? Let's celebrate resilience together.
Avery Collins sat quietly in her Manhattan penthouse, the city lights glittering like distant stars beyond the windows. She had lived a life that many would call extraordinary, yet her story was not about fame or fortune. It was about lessons learned, boundaries honored, and the quiet strength of a woman reclaiming her life. Today, she wanted to share those lessons, not as advice, but as a reflection, an invitation for others to see the power in self-awareness and courage. She leaned back, her gaze drifting to the skyline, and spoke with the calm authority of someone who had seen the depths of betrayal, the heights of triumph, and the delicate balance in between. Life, she said softly, doesn't always turn out the way we imagine. People may disappoint you.
Circumstances may betray your expectations, but one thing no one can take from you is the life you build for yourself. The integrity you protect, the wisdom you carry, and the freedom you claim. Her voice carried a quiet strength, a cinematic resonance that drew the listener in. Avery reflected on her journey, the love she had trusted, the betrayal she had endured, and the careful decisions she had made to protect both her heart and her inheritance. Wealth, she continued, does not define love. It can shield you, yes, but it cannot create it. True freedom comes from knowing your worth, setting boundaries, and refusing to compromise your integrity for anyone, no matter how charming or persuasive they may seem. She paused, allowing the weight of the message to settle. Sometimes, she said, silence is not weakness. Silence can be protection. It allows you to observe, to understand, and to choose your path with clarity. Not every secret is a betrayal. Not every choice is selfish. Sometimes it's the only way to preserve your heart and your power. Avery's eyes softened as she spoke of love, trust, and self-discovery. I learned that freedom is priceless. It cannot be bought, borrowed, or stolen. You either claim it for yourself, or you spend a lifetime letting others define it for you. And let me tell you, nothing feels more empowering than walking away from what diminishes you and embracing what elevates you. She smiled faintly, recalling the pivotal moments of her life, the snowy proposal, the prenup, the quiet betrayal, and ultimately the reclaiming of her independence. Would I have revealed my inheritance sooner? Maybe, maybe not. The lesson isn't in the money. It's in the timing, the patience, and the wisdom to protect what matters most: your autonomy, your heart, and your future. Avery's voice became more inviting, more intimate, as if speaking directly to each listener. I want you to reflect on your own life. Are you protecting your heart? Are you honoring your boundaries? Are you choosing freedom over fear, self-worth over someone else's validation? She let the question linger, a soft, echoing challenge to anyone willing to listen. And then, with quiet certainty, she offered the final call to action, not for herself, but for the viewers who might be standing at their own crossroads. Share your story. Comment below. Let us talk about trust, love, and the power of protecting yourself. Like, share, and subscribe, not just to follow my journey, but to be reminded that your journey matters too, that your freedom matters, that your story, with all its trials and triumphs, is worth telling. Avery stood, walking towards the balcony, letting the cool breeze brush against her face. The city stretched endlessly before her, a tapestry of lights, movement, and possibilities. Life will test you, she said, her voice carrying over the skyline, but it will also teach you. Trust yourself, guard your heart, honor your boundaries, and never, ever forget that freedom, true freedom, is your most valuable inheritance. With that, she turned back to the room, her expression a perfect balance of serenity and strength. Her story had ended, yet it also became a mirror for everyone listening, a reflection of resilience, empowerment, and the quiet victory that comes from claiming your life on your own terms. Would you have revealed your inheritance? How do you protect your heart while navigating love, trust, and betrayal? Comment below and share your perspective. Your story might inspire someone else to reclaim their power. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about strength, wisdom, and self-worth.